Thank you, and thank you for having us here to talk about the upcoming legislative session. I think everybody's looking forward to getting the work going. As the governor mentioned during his press conference, there are a number of really pressing issues that the state needs to address. And frankly, there really aren't any surprises there because they are the same issues that we've been facing and unable to quite solve here for a few years. But they include affordable childcare, challenges to our K through 12 education, higher ed education, affordable housing, and property tax relief. So those are just a few of the items that I suspect you'll be asking us questions about, but also things that the minority caucus in the House are laser focused on. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Good morning. It's nice to see all of you. Thank you, Jack. It's nice to see all of you. It's nice to be looking at another legislative session on top of the 311-day session with recesses that we had last year. Hopefully this session is quick, efficient, and deals with substantive issues that will make the lives of Idahoans better. I think from the minority party's perspective, nothing seems to change. We are dealt a pandemic crisis. We have $1.1 billion in federal COVID funds. The legislature, despite its very lengthy 2021 session, only managed to appropriate 4% of that. It has spent approximately 1% of that money. There are very critical needs in the state of Idaho right now today in terms of workforce, businesses not being able to find the workers that they need, workers not being able to find jobs that are profitable to them. And the governor pointed out that we've got three openings and one applicant on average across the state. Critical needs that need to be met immediately. This session needs to be laser focused. It needs to adjourn by late March, and it needs to address these issues in a meaningful way in the short term. Long term, we have a great deal of cash on hand. I don't subscribe to the idea that it's a surplus. I think it's become structural. It's due to the fact that we do not spend enough money in Idaho in investing in this state and the needs of the people of Idaho. And so we have too many jobs that aren't profitable. We have housing that is not affordable. We have an education program in Idaho that per pupil is number 50 in the nation. Mississippi spends more on education than we do. We know that that puts a significant burden on our property taxpayers, and we know that the issue of affordable housing is not just housing price, it's also our extremely high property taxes. Thank you.
Well, good morning and welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk about the coming session, but I also want to just remind you that we did accomplish some things last year. We lowered taxes for individuals. We lowered taxes for corporations in our state. We have a very business-friendly state. That's why we're growing, and I think, and our businesses are doing so well. But that does put pressure on housing. The governor in his announcements earlier today and answers to your questions talked that may be a plank in his agenda for the coming year, and so we'll see how that all plays out. We also dealt with the COVID pandemic. There was concerns about the governor's ability just to have an ongoing emergency declaration and put restrictions on the state. We still hear from a lot of people to remove the restrictions, remove the emergencies. There are none in place. And so we want to make sure people are aware of that. So as we look at the future, the legislature is where the governor, any governor, gets their authority to declare emergencies, to deal with those emergencies, and to manage them. There was some criticism of the legislature that we were taking authority away from the governor during the last session. I don't believe we took any authority away. We clarified it, and I think we established the role that the legislature properly should play based on our Constitution. So we did a lot of things, I think, that were really good. We funded education at the highest levels in our history. We'll continue to do that. You heard the governor talk about the surplus and the ARPA monies and the funding that's going to go to education. You'll get more detail on that in the State of the State address. But I think this is going to be a great session. It's going to be an opportunity for us to do some things we've never been able to do for education, tax relief, and for our transportation and infrastructure at the state and the local levels. So thank you.
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't feel badly, but I have about half my voice. I have tested negative, and isn't it refreshing just to have a good old-fashioned cold? I would echo the sentiments of my colleagues here. I don't agree with some of the causes that I heard at the first of the line, but I do think there'll be several drivers this session that will make that will define this session. Number one, you're sitting on a historic surplus. And the word historic doesn't really do this justice when compared to the size of it. Now, we can argue about why we have that, but the message and the reason we have it is clear is because our policies of the past are working, and Idaho is a business-friendly state, and people and that business activity is showing up in our tax code. Now, that gives us a lot of opportunities here. And I think that we, as a state, take those opportunities similar to what you would do in your family budget if you come into some money. You pay off any debts you have. You fix the things that you've been stalling on fixing and kicking down the road. Idaho is at a crossroads in that we are, we're the fastest growing state in the union, both politically and or population-wise and economically. And so that's going to put some pressure on our infrastructure of all kinds, both the hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure, including our school systems. And I think that this session will be about fixing some of that stuff. Being proactive on our roads and bridges, proactive in our water quantity issues, and also our water quality issues. And then making targeted investments back into our K-12 system. Literacy, K-12 or K through 3 literacy has still got to be one of our state's priorities. Our third graders need to leave, leaving those grades at closer to grade level than Kevin Richards says they are in these articles. So we have, indications are that we've slipped a little on those numbers, and that should be a state, that should be a clarion call to the whole state to get on top of that issue. I look forward to your questions. I agree with my colleagues on the need for a quick, efficient session. And of course, we're still having some hangover from the last one and how long it went. And for a bunch of reasons, I guess we can talk about. But from my position as speaker, we will enforce deadlines and those types of things of transmittal. And we'll get the people's work done sooner rather than later. We have big things. Everybody knows that there'll be a tax package. Let's get that. Let's do one for once in January. Anyway, there's some things there that we'll come back to specifically. We've been briefed a couple, 3 times, walked through the governor's budget. As always, there are things that we like, that I like anyway. I'll quit using the second or the first person plural. But, and then there's some things that we're going to talk about. But we are in a rare situation financially between our general fund surplus and the federal monies, and we have a chance to make investments in our state that will pay dividends for decades, and we need to be all about finding that best way and setting up framework to do that and to best allocate this this money around to the states, whether it's needs-based or priority-based or what. those are still unanswered questions, and we need to make some policy up that will direct how that money flows out. Melissa, we look forward to your questions and your mediation of the group here.
You sound convincing, and I appreciate that. And just as a reminder for our lawmakers, if you could summarize the question for the people who are watching over the stream so they know what you're answering. I'll go ahead and take the first question. You mentioned, let's pass a tax package in January. I imagine that you have something in mind. What does it look like? And are the tax chairmen on the same page?
Yes, I have something in mind. Yes, it would seem. Oh, let me repeat the question. Are you really going to do a tax package in January? Are your chairmen lined up? I think that's the gist of the question. I think that, from what I hear, and things can change, but I think that the tax chairmen on both sides are on the same page. And I think that there are RSs out there that would that represent that. Now, there's always going to be those that will want to gild the lily, and but I think that this. And I've read the bills, and I think that they are as ready to go. Let's just get this conversation started in January early, rather than having this be a leverage point at the end of the session. That will be what I would advocate.
I'm on the Revenue and Taxation Committee in the House, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. I hope that as we have it, we pay attention to what the priorities should be. Property tax relief specifically when it comes to tax cuts. Income tax relief, I'll tell you, I'm just not hearing that from my constituents. I'm not seeing it play out in the state. I'm not seeing a public outcry for it, but property tax relief, absolutely. And it reminds me of when I was in the legislature from 2006 to 10, and when I ran in 2006, during the campaign, there was a special session. There was maintenance and operation levies that local property tax payers were responsible for to support their local schools, and it was in the amount of about $260 million. There was outcry. Property taxes were increasing in the Treasure Valley and Coeur d'Alene specifically, but also in Pocatello, where I'm from. And taxpayers wanted relief. The legislature responded. Governor Risch called a special session. The maintenance and operation levies were eliminated. The maintenance and operation budget obligations were passed on to the general fund. And you had an immediate $260 million worth of property tax relief for taxpayers. Now, there were some criticisms of that process. I don't think those same criticisms are valid now. But we're coming up on $220 million worth of supplemental levies that local taxpayers are responsible for just to have the quality of schools that they can afford. Not that they want, but that they can afford. And keep in mind, this is a constitutional responsibility of the state legislature, not local taxpayers. The state legislature is responsible for that. So I hope that that is at the top of our list, local property tax relief, and that we accomplish that, give our taxpayers, our constituents, some relief from increasing property taxes.
So with respect to the issue of income tax cuts, I think a couple of things we need to be looking at. We've dealt with rates now a couple of times over the recent past. We need to be looking at some tax credits. We need a daycare tax credit. We need to improve that child care tax credit. We should be looking at improving our minimum wage in Idaho and providing a business tax credit for some of the cost of that in order to phase that in so that we can get some immediate injection of better wages into the economy, so that instead of having one worker for every 3 openings apply, we get more like 3 for 3 openings that exist. So there are some things that we can do somewhat differently than we've done in the past. If I was prioritizing, I would put I would put property taxes way ahead of income tax cuts for the same reasons that Representative Rutke just mentioned. However, I would say this. The Speaker talked about paying down debt. We've got going on $220 million of debt at the school district level. And as I see the extra money we've got, we should be doing four things. We should pay debt. We should do tax cuts. I favor property tax cuts. We should recognize that the surplus started when the governor did a 5% holdback in a year in which we did not have any danger of a deficit, and it's structural. And there is money in this so-called surplus that should be invested in infrastructure. So we've got those issues to deal with, and I think the ultimate outcome could be, and I think you would have a pretty good consensus in the legislature if we put together the tax cuts that I imagine the income tax cuts that the Republicans want with the property tax cuts that the people want. And we can afford to do that. And we could probably provide residential property taxpayers in Idaho a 25% plus cut in their property taxes by doing that, especially when we pay off the supplemental levies and the school bonds.
Interesting question. And obviously, the raising of revenue comes from the House and not the Senate. So the idea that we'd get something sooner in the session is welcomed by the Senate because I think it will lead to better outcomes. I think from the standpoint of any tax relief is going to be perceived by the public in a good way. It's interesting that some of the public is saying, no, I don't really want a tax relief. I'd rather see you put the money into roads and schools and do the deferred maintenance things that need to be done to keep our state and our universities and colleges running properly. So that's going to be the debate as to how best to do that. One of the things that we seem to forget sometimes is no matter what tax you call it, it's still the same people paying it. It's still the average citizen out there that pays the tax. You'll see some discussions probably about, well, let's eliminate the grocery tax. And that's a big number to do that. That sounds good, but with the tax credits that go with it, we're actually, I think, better off as Idaho citizens to have it and to get the credit. And we can increase the credit. We can do some things. But you have to remember, a lot of the people that come here to recreate, that have second homes, pay that grocery tax. That's the only tax they pay other than maybe a fuel tax when they buy some fuel. So that does help us as a state, and it's a big number. And if you take that away, you're going to have to replace the money some way. Property tax relief is really an interesting question because we could go in and say, okay, you can't have any property tax and not do anything more than that. Well, that doesn't help the cities, doesn't help the special taxing districts. It certainly doesn't help schools. So there has to be a balance of how you establish a tax package, I believe. There probably is a reason for some property tax because it's one of the few means that local governments, and local municipalities and counties and schools can actually raise money. And the legislature has been very tight-fisted and continues to be very tight-fisted with local government. So I think there's a real debate that's going to go on, what's the best way to do this, but there will be significant tax relief one way or another, I believe.
Well, I appreciate the question and the chance to come back. Let's remember a couple of things. Whenever you want to prop up property taxes with general fund, that you're writing for a fall down in the out years. And it's nice to point to a surplus. But you all know that there, in the surplus, there's a component of ongoing money, but most of it is one time. And we can, and you can come in to the rescue and prop up the property taxes or lower them for a year or two, depending on the amount of one-time money you want to use. But that is not a good way to do it long-term. Let's talk about the $220 million of supplementals that are out there. I mean, that is a good place to start, but here's the problem. And I would urge you, one of you enterprising reporters, to get with me later and get this report that qualifies and prioritizes or puts in order the school districts that have zero supplemental up to the other end of the spectrum, and the poster child is Moscow, that their supplemental raises over $100,000 per classroom unit. And if you go to Jefferson County, they're still at zero. And so if the state comes in to fix stuff, how do you be fair to Jefferson and remove the supplemental burden in Latah at the same time with money that is generated statewide? So if you want to shift, we can shift, but you have some inequities in the system at this point that bog this discussion down early in the part. Now, and we can come back to some of these other ideas of credits or not credits, but whenever we shift property tax burdens back to the general fund, that needs to be done in a way that is equitable across the 44 counties. And it needs to be done in a way that is sustainable and can be used farther out. There are certain responsibilities that the state has delegated to counties through the years that maybe is a better place to start, in my opinion. Maybe the court system and the public defender system and those types of things should be shifted back to the general fund. Keep in mind that when then Governor Risch remove the M&O, there were no provisions left in that. And in my county, because I keep track, that was 2 mills worth of property tax relief. But it was not long until that vacuum that was created by removing the 2 mills was filled up by other taxing entities, and my property taxes went down for 1 year, and then the vacuum was filled in the other taxing districts. And so in order for that to get through the House of Representatives, there's going to have to be if it's going to be a property tax relief this year, it's going to have to stick in the out years. And so I think those are just the cold hard facts in the committee that Representative Rutke serves in. And in order to get it out of there, they're going to have to be some assurances that it's not just we're not going to just lower it here and open the door to raising it there. Keep in mind that these property taxes are set by local units of government, and we have begged for 2 years to bring us a plan that fixes this. And we're still waiting. Thank you.
Well, so the question was, how much will politics get in the way of trying to do these good things for the state that both the governor and those of us up here have talked about it? It's going to get in the way. We saw it play out on front row seats last year in the House, and it causes me a lot of concern. Every hour we spend talking about some made-up social issue that lacks support of data, facts, science, that's done to play to a base, that's done to get clicks and donations, is an hour we do not spend on things that are really critical to Idaho's young families. and their aging families. We're talking about housing affordability. We're talking about property taxes that are out of control. We're talking about affordability of higher education and quality K through 12 education. The list goes on and on. Every hour we spend placating the far right in the House is an hour we do not spend getting real work done for Idaho families.
I certainly agree with that. I would just point up one issue. Because of critical race theory, there was a $2.5 million cut to the higher education budget. And this is what we're facing all too often in Idaho. We have the money. JFAC was prepared to appropriate that money. A good number of members of the legislature were prepared to vote that money with no concern that it was going to throw our budget out of balance. It was cut solely for political purposes. And as the governor pointed out this morning, without a lot of substance behind it, some would say with no substance behind it, I'd be one of them. And so politics has gotten in the way of doing something about the underfunding of higher education in Idaho. And politics will probably get in the way again on all of these issues. And it's an election year. But, you know, there are two kinds of legislators, folks. There are legislators who come here to do politics as their number one priority, and their sole concern is to get reelected. And there are legislators who come here to represent the people and to do public policy and make tough decisions. And you see them, and we see them, and we know who they are. And it's time for the grown-ups in the room to step up, and the grown-ups in the room are the people who care about the public interest and fight. And I'm going to tell you, I think it's a majority of the legislature. But too often, there's a divide and conquer that occurs. And so that's really what we need to do this session. We need to step up, and the grown-ups need to take charge and make the hard decisions. Now, we're going to have disagreements between the parties and within the parties on that. But if we are working towards the public interest, we can at least minimize the interference and the background noise of the political agendas.
Just quickly, the question dealt with money versus politics and issues getting focused on. I think that you follow any of the issues in the legislature, you follow the money. So one way or another, it all comes back to the same thing. I think when you think about, again, I started my opening remarks with the things we did accomplish. I think we put a lot of the tough issues behind us last year as it related to managing the pandemic and the role of the legislature. And I think we come into this session with a much better understanding of our role and a better relationship, I believe, with the executive branch. So I think there's some good things that have already happened. Yes, it is going to be an election year, but I think the most focus it'll be is how do you spend this money and how does it impact policy in our state. So you can't separate them, but I think you can manage them. And sometimes one of the biggest problems is sometimes the adults act like children. And so we have to be careful that how we do this. And I think it's really important that we figure out ways to bridge that gap of communication, try and figure out how to work with the House. Even the bills that the Senate heard during the 3-day session, when it was all said and done, even the sponsors were saying, yeah, they probably need to be amended. Those issues will come up again. I think the proper time can be given to those, and I think a lot of the issues can be amended and adjusted in such a way that they can move forward. So I think a lot of the angst you saw hopefully won't be there. Everybody's going to be wanting to get home, particularly with district changes. There are going to be a lot of new people you've never knocked on their door before. So there's going to be some real pressure to get in, do our business, and get out of here.
I think we need to give the Idaho voters some credit. I've long subscribed to the mantra that good policy is good politics. And our voters out there want to see results when it comes to on pocketbook issues. And, we're coming off the heels of a historic tax cut last year and rebates. And regardless of, how you want to categorize it, that rebate check can pay property taxes and get you across the bridge while we're still arguing about the policy. But good policy is good politics. Idahoans understand that we need to be investing in our infrastructure. That's good politics. Idahoans want good schools for their kids. They're all vested in these kids leaving Idaho schools as well prepared for life as they possibly can be. And being seen and policy that pushes that is good politics. I don't know if my subject verb agreement is all right there, but but that's Idaho. Let's give our voters credit. They can see through this, particularly if you all do your jobs and communicate what is happening here. And don't moan the fact that the media has moved on to a electronic base. Stay with it. Do it. The media getting the story out is absolutely critical. We'll do our jobs here, and there's plenty of times that the adults in the room are going to have disagreements. Now it's our job to make sure that those disagreements happen in a civil way, and that for the betterment of the end product. But good policy will end up being good politics here, and we are at a crossroads as a state in critical areas, and we've got to be seen making policy that is going to well position Idaho into the future.
We are already more than halfway through our allotted time, and we have a number of questions both online and in the room. Really quickly, along those lines, Sharon Fisher asks, do you intend to keep your option open regarding suspending rather than adjourning sine die?
Chuck was talking to me. I missed the question.
Since you want to get out of here so early in March, do you want to keep your options open like you did last year when it comes to suspending rather than adjourning sine die?
I think the answer to that has got to be yes. We always like to keep our options open. No one can predict what will happen. Obviously, the numbers are spiking again, but we're 2 years into this, and I would advocate for all to take the personal steps necessary to live in the world as we have done as a state. It didn't bring us to a screeching halt. We found ways to work through it. The legislature will do the same thing. If we lose critical people or critical stuff, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So we got to leave ourselves some options, but I don't see a repeat of last year.
Yeah, I would just follow up. As you know, the Senate sine died in May. The House decided to recess until the end of the year, and they had some other business they needed to take care of. So they needed to be available to do that. The 3-day session was very rushed. Bills were printed. They didn't have, in my opinion, the constitutional requirements of allowing the public to participate and to testify. So I think when you look at, no one wants a full-time legislature. There may be a few in the legislature that, that's their primary job and that's the only income they have. But we've always taken the position, we're part-time. It's more important that we're home with our families and doing our jobs and come here for the least amount of time that it takes to get our work done and then finish up and go home. But I think the constitutional amendment that we proposed is important. We're one of only 14 states that can't have some way of calling themselves back into session. And in the first year of this COVID emergency and the things that were going on, the legislature had a role that it could have and should have played in appropriating funds, looking at the issues of the declarations of the emergencies, what were the management issues that we needed to have a say in. We came back into session and dealt with those. We think we're in a much better situation today than we were a year ago. So we think we've accomplished a lot, and we hope that we can get our business done and sine die, go home, let the voters decide on the constitutional amendment in November.
So the legislature should adjourn sine die before April 1, and if there is a need for a further session, we should rely on the special session provisions, which allows the governor to call a special session and to set the agenda that should be addressed. The Constitution, I think, is quite clear that this is not to be a full-time legislature, and it is not to have the option of holding itself over. 311 days out of 365 is full-time. It is not what the people of Idaho want. It's not what I want. It is, as the governor said, legislators who are full-time are going to take up residence in Boise. They're going to lose the connection to their districts. The values of a state house and the values of a capital city are not the values of the various districts. They aren't even the values of my district, and my district is just a hop, skip, and a jump down State Street from here. So we need to remember that. And our legislators need to go home before the end of April. And the final thought is, I once heard a quote, and I'm going to have to paraphrase it. I don't remember the exact words. But the idea was that if you don't have a deadline, all you have are dreams. Ideas without deadlines are dreams. That means they never happen. And if we don't have a hard deadline, and that's a problem we've had for many years in this legislature. We have transmittal dates. We have dates by which your legislation has to be in. And we just run by those all the time. We do not live by our deadlines. And so we are not efficient, and we are not businesslike, and we don't get our work done. We need to change that.
Just so there's no misunderstanding in the public, when the discussion about full-time legislators and the extended session, the legislators did not get paid per diem during the time they were off. They got paid per diem for the 3 days they were here in November. So don't misunderstand. No one was getting paid per diem or taking advantage of that. And that was one of the things that we agreed to when we passed the resolution to not allow the per diem to be paid.
Right. Next question comes from Keith.
Yesterday at the Economic Outlook Committee, experts told them part of the worker shortage involved two things. Retirement among workers is the main thing, but they also said working age people staying home, these are mainly women, staying home to take care of children and elderly. It sounds like the Democrats have said they want to work on child care. I didn't hear anything from Senator Winder or Mr. Speaker. Is that something they can go through, something to help with child care or elder care? Do you think this would?
Well, I believe that would be in the form of a tax credit. I mean, I think we should, take a look at those types of things. There's the Revenue Tax Committee will weigh those things, credits, exemptions. I've always had a tough time, but the demographic, as you describe, has changed, and it'll be whether or not the stakeholders on that side of the issue can come and make their case starting in that committee. So bring the ideas, let's hear them.
Yeah, I would just follow up on that question is there is an effort already going on between the House and the Senate to bring forward full-time kindergarten. But there are some districts in the state that already have it. There are some districts that don't even have the space available to do it. So it can't just be something where you say we're going to have, and you're going to have full-time kindergarten. We've given discretionary funds to the districts to use. I think you'll see proposals to give discretionary funds to districts to use for full-day kindergarten. I think it's part of the whole daycare issue that goes on out there. But the better we can prepare our students in the kindergarten level to come into first, second, third grade, the better off we're going to be. From the standpoint of daycare, as you know, the governor talked about that in his responses to your questions, that probably would be something you'd hear more detail about on Monday. But I think there are real reasons to look at daycare and how do we provide that? How do we help the public and the private sector actually provide that service to their communities. This isn't about state-run daycares. This isn't about taking over daycare and having indoctrination daycare centers. This is about helping the private sector meet the demands and needs for daycare in their communities.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of agreement if we can focus on solutions for this. Because if you want to impact Idaho families directly, we talked about the property tax, but this is the one. Providing reliable, affordable, and quality childcare for working families is absolutely critical. When my wife and I, when we left the military, we had 2 young kids. We went back to school. The only reason we could go back to school and that we could focus on getting an education to better our lives was because we had affordable, reliable, quality childcare. And you'll hear that from everybody. And what happens when you don't? Grandparents end up filling the void. Sometimes they work. That disrupts their work schedule. You have working families. Their schedules get disrupted when they can't get affordable, quality, and reliable childcare. And what does that mean? That means it causes problems for the employers. This is a business issue. And our largest businesses, our small businesses, they're all talking about it. In my small business that I own, I know how important that childcare service is for my employees because it allows them to come to work and stay focused and get things done, which helps our business thrive. So we got to tackle this problem. And the great thing is we also get some fantastic employees back into the workforce, which are desperately needed.
We have about 10 minutes left, and I have one more question online. I'd ask you to be succinct. Senator Winter, you touched on this earlier, but Doug from Spokane Public Radio is wondering what the other 3 think about the repeal of the state grocery tax. Is it a viable idea this year?
The question is whether repeal of the grocery tax is a viable idea. I believe it is. I do not disagree with the speaker or the pro tem on the need to be careful with these unspent funds. They are not unlimited, and I do agree that there is a component of one-time money that should not be spent in an ongoing way, and a grocery tax cut would be an ongoing commitment of funds to that tax relief. However, the legislature has come very close. In fact, the legislature passed a grocery tax cut. It was vetoed by Governor Otter, and Governor Little committed himself when he ran for governor to grocery tax cut. Nothing has really changed on that issue, and it is the kind of tax relief that everybody gets, whether you're rich, poor, or everywhere in between. And we have seen our income tax go up, started at 3%, we're now at 6%. And there are people in Idaho who are struggling. They do not enjoy much in the way of income tax relief because they don't pay much in income taxes. And this would be a way to help them. I understand that there's a cost involved, as Senator Winder pointed out, but the cost is well worth it in my estimation.
I'd like to weigh in a little bit on this. All of the rhetoric that we hear around this forgets the fact that Idaho has a refundable grocery tax credit. Most of that negates the sales tax on food for most Idahoans to a large degree. Now, we can raise that. If it's out of whack, that can be raised. But your cold hard numbers are this. You raised $2.6 billion on sales tax statewide. Approximately 12% of that total comes from taxing food as defined by food stamps. All right, so that's about $320 million less money that you're going to bring in. But you get to get rid of the credit system, but that only costs about $170. So you're going to have $140 million of tax benefit coming from this change that is going to accrue to two demographics here. People that do not file income taxes and people that are from out of state. Now, I believe that our tax policy should always benefit hard-working, tax-paying Idahoans. In addition, if you're an entity of local government here who relies on the revenue sharing from the general fund, the first 11.5% of that sales tax money goes through the distribution formula, and you just took $320 million out of that distribution stream. So these are not, and I understand how sexy it is to take the sales tax off of food. But we have created a system now that takes the effects of taxing food on Idahoans off of Idahoans through the credit system. It was good policy when they put it in. If the numbers are out of whack, increase the credit. But to throw this issue out just for the strength of the demagoguery that you can have in a political year is folly when it comes to policy-wise, because it's going to cut the money to local governments, and and the tax benefit will accrue to people that do not file Idaho state income tax forms, and it will accrue to people that include out-of-staters. And a tax policy in Idaho, the benefits ought to accrue to tax-paying Idahoans.
I'm going to ask you to be very brief. We're going to try and get two more questions in, Ruth and then Bill.
Thank you for the question, and the question was, is this the year we fund full-day kindergarten? I'd like to think that it is, but as you know, we can't speak for the full legislature. We're speaking as best we understand circumstances and try and relate that to you. But I think there's a good effort going on between the House and the Senate, and it started during the last session. And so I think there's a very good possibility that it could happen this year.
I think it will happen. I think we were within a nanometer in the last, I'll call it the winter session that we had last year. I think we were very close, and I think that we have some of the very best of our legislators working very hard on this issue. So I'm very optimistic.
I assume that's directed at me, guys. Well, I'm always open to that, but this is ground we have already plowed. The numbers I gave you are accurate, and the approaches that have come in the past have been politically generated, and but we've got to be careful with our money, particularly in the out years here. I heard probably the best idea that the other night is, and this was from a non-grocery purveyor. These are other businessmen that pay that their goods are sales taxed. They said, why don't you just lower the tax rate from 6 to 5 and give it to everybody on everything they buy? Not just on the list that are, and another thing and then you got to always be buffing up your list of what is groceries and what is not groceries. And why don't you just lower it to 5 and give it to everybody? Now, being a numbers guy, that's probably more than you want to dedicate to this, maybe, in my opinion, but maybe it isn't. But that's the thing, is that all the ideas need to be properly, they need to work at the end of the day, and not just politically.
Lowering the sales tax rate is a conversation worth having.
And I would just say, the assumption in your question, Bill, was that we'd never had that discussion. But during my time in the Senate, we actually amended a House bill and sent back a bill that dealt with the grocery tax. I think there's a better understanding of it today, but I think that discussion will come up, because I think there's still a portion of our caucus, and certainly a portion of the House membership that are talking about this as one of their planks. So I think it will come up, and I think it will get a full discussion. Now, timing and what their package looks like, typically we don't get to see what their tax package looks like until it's kind of thrown over the wall. Maybe our chairman does, maybe some of the committee members do. Hopefully that's one of the lessons we're learning, that the quicker we can engage in that communication with one another, the better off we're going to be on coming up with good legislation.
Let's just get rid of the wall. I mean, House members know that they're only going to be as successful as they, in the legislature, as they can work with the Senate, and vice versa. We've got to, that's when people come and talk to me about their legislation, I say, do you want to make a statement, or do you want to make a difference? Making a difference is a lot harder, and it's going to take cooperation. And it's going to take, you're going to go out and work your tail off to go get your 36 votes, get it out of committee, get the 36, go get the 18. And then there's the governor that's got to think it's a good idea too. And when we come back to those basics of moving legislation, this place will work a lot better.
All right, we're going to have to cut it off there. Senator Burgoyne, that was the shortest answer I have ever heard you give. And I say that with respect after years of hearing your debates.
I'm trying.
Thank you, all 4 of you, for joining us today. We know how busy you are, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks.